the Hall of Tales podcast, episode 3. Again, this is Avi and Jake and Tyler joining you all. Uh, Before we even got into broach the topic of this episode, I really want to mention that our last episode we really weren't too happy with. We had a lot of quality issues as far as the sound went. Such a shame because thought we had some really solid, cool content in there. It was just the quality of our audio was just super bad, and I've since been reaching out to a lot of people that do podcasts, consulting with my other teammates here about what we can do to improve it, because that's what we really want. We want to improve the quality of our episodes and deliver you the best content we can as clearly as we can. So we're striving to make each episode cooler and sound better than the last one before it. So broaching that, what we're going to be covering today is the topic of combat in Larp. That's a pretty important topic to cover when we're talking about Larp, considering it's one of the main ways that there's resolution to things that come up in Larp. It's like, you're faced with a problem. What are you going to do? Well, we're going to fight about it. It's the quickest way to resolve an issue most of the time. Some things that I kind of want to touch on to begin with, when it comes to LARP combat, is that you really got to get in your mind what your expectations are when you go to a LARP and what their combat system is going to be like. We're going to try and stay away from like actual rules when it comes to how combat is done in games. More so that you just got to have the expectation of, okay, is this going to be a lightest touch LARP? Is it going to be a full contact LARP? Because that will drastically affect the way you fight, what weapons you think you're going to be fighting with, etc. But the cool thing I want to start off with first, and I'm going to reach out to my co-host here first, is I want you guys to think of like an awesome combat that you had in your LARPing career that made an impression on you. So like, Tyler, why don't you go first and tell me about like a really good fight that you had from any time that you went fighting?
Perhaps probably one of my favorite fights had to take place during a mod for my character, in which we were hunting down my character's brother, and I brought a specific group with me, and one by one, each member of the group was possessed, and I had to fight in single combat, pretty much until I defeated them, at which point immediately after another one would rise, and I'd have to shift and try to readjust against how I would fight, going up against must have been 4 or 5 different fighting styles, having to constantly adapt and entirely change my mindset as a new opponent approached. Has to be my top fight of all time. Focusing heavily on attack for the first fight, switching into a mix of simply defending and then countering, then into an all-out defensive strategy against one of my final opponents. It was a very interesting fight, especially since it was pretty much one-on-one the entire time.
I distinctly remember that. I think I was the final part of that fight when you and I had a square off, and I'm like, oh great. So I'm gonna rage now and do my best to crush Tyler.
And I survived.
No, you did admirably. That was you know what? When you bring up that memory, I did forget about that fight because that was a pretty intense moment there. Now, what kind of fight style were you fighting with for that?
I had gone into it with a sword and shield fighting style, so I had perhaps one of the better fighting styles for that situation. I was able to easily switch between all-out attack all the way into all-out defense, or a mix between both. So I was able to easily counter and defend against my opponents, or at the same time just eschew defense and just go fully into attack based upon who I was fighting.
And aside from like the actual how difficult the fights were, it was also charged with like a super emotional, high octane RP kind of stuff too, right?
Oh yes, of course. Despite not only having to essentially fight my character's brother, but at the same time fight my character's best friends, it was quite difficult a moment to RP. A lot of torn emotions.
No, that sounds awesome. I definitely I'm gonna reflect on that after this episode and trying to think about how intense that was. Jake, how about you? Do you have one or two like war stories?
Yeah, I can definitely remember a specific battle, and actually, you guys were both there. A lot we attended. We were being pushed back by an invading force, an army, and it was the three of us who were kind of like at the beginning of the army, and the NPCs come rushing in. And at the time, I was using my character uses a two-handed sword, which isn't my favorite style to use in LARPing because it, in my opinion, is disadvantageous. But I kind of use the sword in the way that you would use it in similar to an actual combat situation where I was, using all my powerful feats to basically kill every NPC as I came across. And I remember the moment of like I was like, using a feat here. I killed one and killed another one, killed another one. I just felt like this moment of like my character actually cleaving through like 4 or 5 dudes. Like I'm actually watching a moment out of like 13th Warrior or Die Hard when you just start becoming a wrecking machine. And it's just one of those moments where like kind of get the moment of actually LARPing, getting off the D&D tabletop and experiencing what the awesome things your character is really doing, and it just felt so real at the moment. And it's as much credit as it was to the game itself. It was really the NPCs who made that moment for me that make me feel like that badass because they took their hits and they acted appropriately. Like they went flying backwards when I used a really powerful attack, and it makes me feel as much of a badass for like doing those things. They gave me that great moment, and I remember that very vividly. LARPing and that's what I want to give people when I NPC for them is those kinds of moments. And I think kind of going off what Tyler says, the moments where you have a fight between a character that's your friend, due to like some being taken over or mind possession, we have to fight them, can be very intense. So I think specifically the moment I'd have to talk about is when Avi, your character, was going through your special quest, and you were tasked with me and you were fighting as part of one of your tests. And I remember that the weapons you had couldn't work on me, so I had this like huge advantage on you, and
Yep, I remember. Yep.
I had the decision if as my brother, if I wanted to go easy on you or if I want to fight you as hard as I could. And that's what I ended up doing, was fought you as hard as I could, and we had a really nice intense battle. And I did end up winning, but like it was a great lesson that we learned after the fight, which I really liked that mechanic too. But I liked the fact that even though like it's my brother, I don't want to, I want him to succeed in his quest, but it's also I have to be true to the character, and I know that he wouldn't want me to take it easy on him. This is what this is what this moment's about. It's about a true test of martial skill, and those are the two moments I really think about. I think of like LARP combat, like what it should be.
Right. So it sounds pretty rad that you kind of had like you turned on your Mushu mode and were just like you had like a body count.
Yeah, exactly. It's very Dynasty Warriors-esque, I would say.
That's awesome. Um, so it's so weird because we're all talking about instances at the same game. Because my two are also from Faglen when we attended there.
Mm-hmm.
My first one was probably I think my second or third event, and it was an unwinnable fight. And at the time, my character was not one to shy away from any kind of challenge, no matter what it was, no matter the odds. So this premise was that there was this giant, evil, corrupted ent, like stories high that no one could affect. Like it was just impervious, and it was making its way to town. And I decided, like, you know what? I'm gonna say, like, everyone, like, there's also an invading army. Why don't you guys go fight off that army? I'm gonna do my very best to distract this thing long enough so citizens can be evacuated. And I pulled in a few other people, and we all kind of led the monster away. So I think there were like 5 of us in total. Um, and this thing was hitting like a truck. We went down multiple times, and it was the thing was we were drawing its aggro, so it was constantly following us away from the town. But the citizens at the end of the day were able to escape. But it was just so intense because it was countering everything we were doing. Like my shield was impervious or rather, my shield was getting in the way of its attacks. So then it just started cleaving through my shield and affecting me. And I'm like, well, shit, there goes my shield. And we just tried crazy tactics on it. Like we had one guy, he was a monk, so he could like do super flips. So I held out my shield and he like back flipped over it and was just like wailing on it from the back. And we were just trying all kinds of crazy shit. And eventually we were just right up against the city gates. And I was the last one to go down, and I was like pummeled directly into the gates of the city. And I'm like, oh my god! And then we shook hands with the NPCs because that wasn't in the plan. The monster was just supposed to show up and then kind of go away. They didn't plan for anyone to really try and fight it because it was stated to be an unwinnable, unkillable monster. So, again, kudos to NPCs that are willing to work with you to make these moments super special that you're going to remember them.
I think
Go on.
building off of that, I don't know if you guys had the opportunity, but at playing a mod boss or like the main boss of an event can be very fulfilling as a part of the story that you get to give people in the moment you get to have with people. Have you or Tyler ever played like a mod boss or a main mod boss? I know it's Frontier Dawn. The game I get an opportunity to play these fantastical characters that are like one offshoots that have these like crazy moments in game that people fight. And your story just reminded me of like playing those NPC roles and kind of how important it is to have those NPCs that are like will go the extra mile to give you something. I remember that I was playing this giant dinosaur and I actually built this rig. It's actually a hiker's backpack, and I built like foam and PVC pipe off of it, along with one of my guys I work with all the time, Joe Gaffney, and we built this rig for this giant monster. And I have it on my back, and we have the sound system come in of rolling thunder because the whole thing is the creature did electrical damage, and the people in the town really didn't know it was coming. They were kind of like, "Oh, we should go hunt this creature, I guess." And all of a sudden, the storm just comes in, and I show up as this creature, and I'm 6 foot by myself. So the creature had the rig off me was another 3 feet. So I'm like 9 feet tall creature with its head that's glowing blue in the night, and with thunder rolling in. And I have these other NPCs around me that are like causing all these lightning sounds and thunder, using the thunderboards. And it was just such a cool moment that I had. I was cool for me to be that intimidating creature, to walk into town and really see the town form a line and then really fall back. Like I wasn't even attacking them, but they were like slowly retreating. And I kind of got to feel like in that moment, I was that monster to them. They really they didn't see me as some guy wearing this backpack. They saw me as this creature that was showing up to them, and they're like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do? What's the game plan here? Like, we weren't expecting this. Like, oh, we got to figure this out, guys." And I saw their wheels turning, and then the fight started, and they're trying this, they're trying that, and I played off of that moment, what they were doing to make them have like a cooler experience and make it tough, but also like rewarding. I love that. I love playing an NPC probably more because of those moments I get to give to people. Because you could have an awesome moment with somebody and they can be like, "Oh, that was a cool fight." But when you get to NPC something like that, you can have 10 or 20 people being like, "Oh my God, that was amazing. When you did that thing, it blew my mind."
Right. No, that sounds awesome and super like cinematic, especially when things like line up perfectly, like the thunder and all this other stuff. And actually, we'll probably do an episode of what it means to NPC and what you want to give to the people that you're playing with as an NPC. And then my other story of a combat is, I don't know what it is, but a lot of the times when I go to games, I'm starting to find myself either inadvertently or purposely getting to some kind of leadership role. At Faglen, I was kind of like put into the leadership role, and at Core right now, I chose to become a noble and take on a leadership role. But this was I just become like I was placed in charge of the army fighting this guy who was like a super duper evil wizard guy, Bellatrix, if you guys remember him, spellbender guy. And this was like the entire town is gonna fight a gigantic army. And I worked with like the people that were kind of like the I don't want to say most important people, but the people that the other players looked to. Like we had a person who was like the faith person that everyone looked up to, and then we had the head this guy, the head that guy. And we were all coordinating, and we set up a battle line, and I'm like, all right, so we're gonna have skirmishers, and then as they're coming through the portal, the skirmishers are gonna engage them, and then we'll cycle out the skirmishers, and then the first line of infantry is gonna move forward and fight, and then we'll cycle, and then the healers are gonna be in the middle, and then we can bring people back, and yada yada yada. So it was a different kind of combat, wherein it's not like a toe-to-toe duel kind of thing. It was being in charge of group tactics and actually working with the other players to like formulate the strategy of how we're actually gonna take on this gigantic battle. So that one definitely stuck with me. And then at the end of that, again, talking about like how it was emotionally charged and there was a lot of RP to it. Like you were getting sucked into like the nether, like you're going to like a black hole, and I'm losing my fucking mind. Like, oh my God, my brother's going to the black hole. Like, tie this lasso on me. I'm gonna jump in and get him. And they're like, oh, you can't go. And I'm like, I'm going to get him, whether I'm coming back or not. So that was at the end of that fight, and that was like super, super intense. Not so you're going right from the fight, and then it's like crazy RP moment.
Thinking of battles now, that reminded me of a really great fight that I had at a game called Dead Legends. And as Nerf LARPs go, I don't usually have as many. I don't know. I just don't think as much in terms of the fights being as awesome. But this was particularly on theme with the game. It's a very horror western style game, and that particular morning, the fog was really out across the camp, and it was very thick fog that you couldn't see clearly past 5 feet. So you didn't know if it was an NPC or a player that you could see out in the fog and the mist. And we heard screams coming from what was the church of the town, and our group begins making our way. And as we're getting attacked by zombies along the whole way of the fog. We're running through the fog as a group. Every man for himself, but at the same time turning around to make sure our group is going, and we're just like firing darts left and right out into the mist, trying hitting targets left and right, just getting attacked. Some people getting dragged down, but getting fought back and picked up by the group, and then continuing on before we finally reach the church and make a stand with the rest of the town. And that was just so on theme with the game. It was so coincidental that the game just skyrocketed.
It's freaky when all the stuff lines up like that.
Yeah, definitely. That can make a moment very cinematic for everybody. It kind of very helps with the immersion of being in that moment. And I think something that's really interesting that I'm hearing is through our stories we're telling is sometimes it's not the moments are cool in the battle, but I almost had just as much fun or remember even more vividly the planning of the battle, not the battle itself. Like when you go up there, you have you fight one or two NPCs or maybe the boss, and you have like this cool moment. But I remember, the planning with people. You get to introduce yourself to more characters. You figure out other people's roles. You all work as a unit, and you come up with this battle plan. I mean, it's very satisfying feeling to come up with a battle plan that works out perfectly for the main mod boss or mod, and like it goes away flawlessly. And like it's still a tough battle, but you feel like that we're doing everything right, and that we're all working together as a unit, as a team, and you accomplish your goal. That's a very big part of combat and LARPing is everyone working together. I know that when I think about a rule system and balancing rules or combat to how NPCs are, I like to make NPCs weaker than a normal PC, but the fact that NPCs are numerous and PCs are singular, the difference. So that, yes, PCs are stronger and they're invincible when they work together. But if they are, individuals to a standpoint, then they will get overwhelmed by NPCs. So it's almost, you force people to work together, and it's all about building that community.
No, I know what you mean, because I've kind of seen it for a number of ways that when you have the players, it's kind of like an army of itself, but it's an army of individuals. It's like they'll work together sometimes, but it's not often enough that they do. And then actually having planned like so many plans throughout playing different games, it's like, man, that one worked perfectly, and then that one went completely to shit, but it was still awesome. So now that we've all shared our war stories, I want to get into some reasons why LARP fighting is like a thing unto itself, because it's not a perfect recreation of historical fighting by any means. Because we're doing lightest touch in most games around here, unless it's like some heavy combat game or full on like SCA heavy fighting. Because when I've been doing a lot of research into like historical medieval martial arts and all the different things that entail. And a lot of it has to do with like literally the physics of the weapons you're using and the way you're using your body. Because, like you said, you don't like fighting with a two-handed sword, and there's a good reason why you're going to be at a disadvantage in some ways at a LARP is because as much as you can sharpen the blade, it's also the weight that you're putting behind it when you're attacking someone in reality. And if you're going at a lightest touch game, you're not going to bear down on someone with all your force on your Kalamazoo weapon and try and go for a headshot. Because that's what would end a fight in reality. Now, I've also seen a couple of different videos done by guys who practice HEMA, which is Historical European Martial Arts. And a lot of them actually are LARPers or formerly LARPed. and they did say that LARPing did kind of in ways influence the way that they fight in HEMA. Help them with their footwork and timing and edge alignment of the blade and such. And vice versa, there's a couple HEMA guys that go into LARPing and they carry over a lot of what they learned in HEMA into LARPing. So it's definitely its own kind of deal, but I'm curious to see what you guys make of the actual idea of having combat in LARP.
I definitely think combat in LARP is in itself its own thing from actual historical and real life fighting. However, having a knowledge of one is almost like an advantage to if you were to try the other. So having sort of this knowledge of real life historical combat styles and going into a LARP, it's sort of an advantage. You have a base to build off of. You're not just swinging a sword around wildly. You at least know how to use one properly, and you can adjust. You can adjust from, all right, I'm putting my full weight into it, aiming for these positions on the human body, to I'm going to pull my weight and I'm just going to not go for the head or any other regions where it's extremely easy to injure someone.
Right.
So I would say when thinking about LARPing combat, when I look at the fighting styles, there are obviously some that have more advantages and disadvantages to others by the nature of, obviously the rule system plays a big factor. But if we're just talking strictly, fighting style, 1v1, everyone is doing the same amount of damage. That sword and shield, in my opinion, reign supreme above all else because you have offense and defense. And, it doesn't really matter how many times, if my defense is half decent and I hit you a couple times with my sword, I will win the battle. And I also feel like sword and board, as a lot of LARPers will call it, is a very easy style to pick up. It's kind of like, hey, I'm new LARPing. Well, why don't you try sword and board? And that's not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. And, sword and board by nature is that way. When people were learning how to fight, in medieval times, sword and board was, even just single sword was the way to go because you had offense, you had defense, you could protect yourself, and you could hurt someone else. It's very boiled down to basics like that. The problem is when you get into like LARPing, it's a system where if I can hit you more times than you can hit me, then I'm going to win the fight. And if I have a shield and all I have to do is hit you a couple times, you're going to run out of energy because you have to hit me way more times with whatever weapon you're using. All I have to do is very minimally, use my shield, shift my body weight, shrug my shoulder or step back to dodge or defend your blows. And similarly, if I'm using a two-handed weapon, that the two-handed weapons weren't really made to be fighting every person all day for 30 or 40 hits. They were made, if I hit you with a leg with a claymore, you weren't supposed to be like, oh man, I just took 2 damage. You're supposed to shatter your shin, and you're down to 1 leg and you're hobbling around because I just used this claymore and took out your leg. And the same thing if I hit your shield. If I hit your shield with this claymore, yeah, you could block the blow, but I could break your arm, I could break the shield, I could stagger you. Those weapons were made to be destructive, not to be, tap somebody multiple times. So because of the nature of the design of the weapon and their function, they have a disadvantage in LARPing in a game where you're supposed to tag people more times than you are supposed to just necessarily do damage.
Right. I definitely agree with you that it's a game of like really, really intense tag for the most part. And I think I definitely enjoy it more when because I don't want anyone to try and fight like 1 whit below their capability in like a LARP fight with air quotes. Like, I want you to try and fight to win, but, because we're not doing real combat, it's going to be better for both of us if we both kind of try and sell it as much as we can. Like, you're hefting a giant greatsword, well, kind of move as if you're hefting a giant greatsword. I'm not saying that you're going to make yourself move so slow that you're just going to open yourself up to all attack, but just kind of sell it a little more as well.
Jumping
go on.
Jumping back to what Jake said briefly, I gotta agree that Sword and Shield. I think if you put a Sword and Shield fighter against any other fighting style, I think 7 or 8 times out of 10 the Sword and Shield will win, even if it's just 2 people who have never had any experience fighting at a LARP. 7 or 8 times out of 10, Sword and Shield will win.
In a LARP scenario,
just
I agree.
Because of the simplicity of it, and because of in a LARP scenario, there is no longer a counter to Sword and Shield. In a real life scenario, axes. Hook the shield, boom, shield's out of the way. You can go right for the body. great swords, as Jake mentioned, smash the shield. That puts them off balance. Shield might get knocked out of the way or broken. Or even a ranged weapon and aiming for legs or head, which is not viable in a LARP. But in a LARP, all those direct counters are not safe and cannot be used, which means Sword and Shield is almost unparalleled. There's no direct counter to it, except for, just Sword and Shielding it.
I think another big difference is you see as a LARPs is the size of the shield can make a very big difference, and design. Some people do sword to knee, or shoulder to ankle. Shoulder to knee, and like shoulder to ankle, and the size varies to width and
Shoulder
stuff.
to ankle is pretty extreme. That's a tower shield.
But I have seen shields like that at LARPs that are those size, or NPCs that don't follow the rules of normal PCs that'll have very large shields. But at that point, you're fighting somebody who, yes, it's very somatic to have this very large shield. It's cool. It makes the fight a lot tougher. But to Tyler said, the only way around these shields are illegal or dangerous moves in the LARPing setting. Hooking a weapon, you're not allowed to do that. Hitting for the head, you're not allowed to do that. You really don't have a lot of other options when it comes to fighting somebody with a sword and shield. So they're at a very large advantage. Now, I will say, in my opinion, if as someone at a top tier sword and board level versus a top tier other fighting style, I think top tier staff fighting is the most deadliest style in LARPing. Because if you're a semi-athletic person who knows how to fight very well with the staff, you can defend yourself and be very offensive to multiple people very efficiently. And I've seen people take down multiple NPCs very quickly and easily that are not like the most athletic guy you've ever seen. And no one who's dunking the ball in basketball, that's for sure. But they know how to fight that way. I think that is the most effective fighting style if we're thinking of top tier masters.
I think top tier Florentine fighters also up there as well.
Mm.
Those who can really, really know and have really practiced and trained with fighting with two weapons at once, and really know the advantages, the disadvantages, and every sort of method of fighting with it, and have mastered it, are also a huge threat, even against Sword and Shield, which normally Sword and Shield against a Florentine fighter, if they're not mastered in the style, it can usually come down to a stalemate with the Sword and Shield eventually winning out due to just attrition. But if a Florentine fighter is just pretty much made themselves untouchable by being able to defend with both their swords at once, or one at once with being ambidextrous perfectly, it comes down to a stalemate entirely, and the Florentine can just manage to get in more hits than the Sword and Shield can.
Right. So mechanically speaking, I'm trying to, because I know a lot of games institute this, where either there's an angle that you have to strike from. Like, I think it's some games are 90-degree angle. That's as far back as you can swing or something like that. Or if you're using multiple weapons, it's no more than 1 hit per second or something. So those things have to be taken into account as well. Because that's kind of like a blanket thing in most LARPs. I find that they have rules that cover that sort of thing. So, in speaking with the Florentine fighter versus the Shield fighter, I tend to agree with you, Tyler, in that point that it's mostly a stalemate. It's, even if they're a novice Shield fighter. And actually, the way we've been talking about these different styles, I definitely think that having a background in any kind of martial art or any kind of training or discipline is going to definitely pay dividends in LARPing. I took martial arts, but I never trained with weapons or anything other than messing around with my dad or something in the backyard with some stuff, or definitely reading and watching movies and trying to practice that on my own. So I definitely think that if you're going to want to get at a level where you feel confident in whatever weapon you're fighting with, take the time to train and spar. Because I remember Jake and I, we used to spar fairly often when we were still living at home, and it definitely improved us instantly. Because me and him became competent fighters, and then when you're going up against someone who's someone who doesn't practice or is, I don't want to say we're just going to crush this noob, but it makes you feel man, I've earned this because I took the time to train and understand how I'm supposed to fight within the realm of LARP.
So, Avi, actually, you bring up something that I want to talk about when it comes to LARP fighting that I think it's really important that everyone keeps in mind, PC and NPC, is whenever you're fighting somebody in a LARP setting, you should always, I think, to fight to their ability. Obviously, situation will dictate. But let's say if I'm an NPC and I'm playing a goblin and I'm fighting somebody who's a hero PC and they are not a very good fighter, I do not want to go up to them and fight as hard as I can and just decimate them like I'm some Black Knight of Death. I want to fight them as a goblin should fight them. I want to fight them to the character's level. If I'm a mook who's supposed to die, that shouldn't kill this player. I don't think that you should fight always like to the end 10th of your ability. If I'm a super athletic guy and do backflips and do barrel rolls and hit somebody at these weird angles and be really intense fighting, just go really hard. Should you really do that to somebody who's a new LARPer, who's new to the hobby? If you're just an NPC that's supposed to go out there and harass the town a little bit, and maybe just I'm a simple goblin guy, you really should always scale your abilities to the character you're playing as an NPC and to the person you're fighting. And sometimes you fight somebody who's no, I want a tough fight. They'll kind of give you the nod, and you're all right, well, we'll fight this the way you want to go. We'll go at your speed, the way you want to do it. And that's great for that person. But sometimes people don't like that. And that's fine too. I think that's okay. It's different people who come to the hobbies for different reasons. And you should always fight to that person's comfort level, to a certain extent. If you're supposed to be a very tough character, obviously you should make that person know that you are not to be trifled with. You're not messing around. But at the same time, you shouldn't be too aggressive and just trounce somebody, because you're turning away people from this hobby for what? For no reason, just so you could have a good moment as an NPC. I feel like that's not the way to do it.
I think, go on, Tyler.
You got to really fight to your audience and to your opponents and to the character you're playing. There are a lot of times as both a PC and an NPC, you can easily find yourself pretty much fighting alone against multiple threats, and that's really when you gotta, if that ever happens, then you obviously say, okay, I'm fighting multiple people, I'm allowed to step it up to my maximum and shift into my best mode. But if you're fighting one-on-one, and especially against a new LARPer, or even an experienced LARPer who just who might not be fighting with their best style, or even if you're fighting against the best, most experienced LARPer at the game, you want to shift based upon their level, really. Even if you're
comes knowing the
PC,
community. Because if you're attending the game and you pay attention to the way people fight, how well they fight, then when they send you out as an NPC, you'll be like, oh man, that guy, he's the top tier big guy when it comes to fighting with that spear. I know that he can take this. So, and you know what? Also, Jake, you're totally right, because if you're gonna be like the goblin that they send out just to harass the town, goblins ain't shit. Why would you fight like you're a master of any style? So I totally agree with that. And it's also something that it'll probably be covered in our NPC episode, but when you come out as an NPC, usually you're going to get briefed by the game masters. Be like, okay, you guys are a mob of goblins, and you're goblins. So what are goblins like? They fight in a horde. When they start to die, they usually run, and they're not very good fighters. And the card reflects that. So don't use skills that aren't on your card. Yada yada yada. So I guess it takes a huge amount of awareness to know who you're fighting, like you said, be aware of their abilities, and just try and scale it, I guess. So for the most part, I agree with that, and you've both made good points to that effect on that. Are there any other kind of points when it comes to scaling your fighting?
Yeah, actually, I would say that when I'm talking or thinking about my personal experience, when I first made a PC, I did sword and board because I was told by people, and I saw myself that I felt it was the most easily approachable style to learn and master. Master. It's you can't master anything really in the amount of time of LARPing, but become competent in. So that's what I did, and I did enjoy it. But then I started NBC, and I realized that was where I had more fun with learning what fighting style I wanted to do. And after NPCing for a while is where I found the fighting style I had the most fun with. I feel like that's a big difference for people. It's if you want me to fight this fighting style, I'm good at it. I can fight and give them a tough fight, but I don't have as much fun fighting with that style as I do with this. And for me personally, I like Florentine the best. It's my favorite fighting style to use. because I like fighting as a more aggressive and dynamic, and being more offensive and being in someone's face the whole time and constantly pressuring them and pushing them. Those are my favorite type of fighting styles, as opposed to one who turtles up. And I consider myself to be a better shield and sword fighter than I am a Florentine fighter, but I have more fun fighting with Florentine. So when I make a PC, I would probably fight Florentine. But if someone wanted me to like, Jake, go out as an NPC, use your best fighting style, I'd probably go sword and board. I feel like it's very interesting that I know a lot of people have those. Tyler, do you have a fighting style you prefer over others?
In terms of skill, in terms of pure skill, my best fighting style probably sword and board, just like you, just like almost any LARPer.
Yeah.
But the fighting styles that I love to do the best is dual wielding daggers, or just sort of having a number of weapons on me and consistently shifting in between fights, like hit a blow with a dagger and then switch to a sword almost immediately. Hit with the sword, switch to a mace, and just like throw between weapons. But
so you need like a golf bag full of weapons on your back.
Yeah, but dual wielding daggers probably has to be my favorite fighting style to do.
Interesting.
I just love the fast paced and just being able to stay quick, as well as getting in close and really using my better attributes of speed versus strength and skill.
That's the other thing when it comes to fighting with dual daggers, though, because I can appreciate it when people like do it up. I just don't like seeing when they run up to people and it's just like tap 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 tap. Like, I would like to see them fight with their daggers in a very dynamic kind of way. I mean, you're there to win the fight, so I understand doing what you have to do. You want to get in the max amount of blows you can before they retaliate and possibly just strike you down because all you have is two daggers. I just wish there was like a better middle ground to be like, unless you're just going to be like completely cracked out with abilities and items, and these are the daggers that were forged by the gods or whatever, so they're super crazy strong. But I don't know. I in reality too, it's like you never really saw people fight with two daggers, like straight up like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That people don't fight with two daggers in a melee open battlefield type of situation, because that's not the kind of weapon you'd want to use. Because you don't fight somebody for 20 blows with two daggers. You fight them very quickly. 3 moves, they're dead. You're cutting their you're cutting vital areas or chinks in their armor. That's the only time you'd really use a dagger.
Almost certainly, realistically, historically, the only time dual daggers would be used as your primary fighting style is when it comes down to I can win within the first 3 hits, because first 3 hits I can make easily within a couple seconds. They're dead, or I've got the jump on them. I can get them from behind.
Right.
I'm never going to walk onto a battlefield, see I'm facing off against armored opponents, cavalry, unarmored, and archers, and I'm not going to be like, all right, dual daggers it is. I can outrun those arrows. I can out dodge those horses. I can leap through the air over those swords and shields and get in from behind. I'm never going to say that. I'm going to say, okay, this is a time for me to look at my opponents and actually choose a better style to face them.
Either that, or you make up the difference with using, again, kind of touching on the mechanics without talking about specific mechanics. You make up the difference with skills when you're using daggers. Like Jake said, you'll use the backstab feat, or you'll use the hamstring feat. So you want to debilitate them and break them down, and you get in your blows. And and then Tyler, if you're saying you're as quick as you are, you got to be light on your feet to get in all those blows for one, and then start to whittle them down. And I guess I don't as much as I did like fighting with a sword and board as Arn, and I definitely thought I did very well, and I was complimented on my fighting. I kind of think my favorite style is actually a bastard sword, or at least a bastard length weapon, because I just like the ability to, in game, a lot of game mechanics. Again, God, it's hard talking about mechanics, but it does factor in a bit with weapon selection. You got that ability to fight with a two-handed style for more control, or if you need to have more balance because you'll have a free hand, you'll be able to fight with one hand. So you open yourself up to like large lunging attacks when you're fighting with having your bastard weapon in one hand versus having concise control fighting with your two-handed weapon in both hands, or your bastard weapon in both hands. So I've definitely practiced that more than probably any other fighting style. Even though I fight with a two-handed weapon now, I still implement a lot of what I picked up from using a bastard sword with some of my first initial characters. So definitely my top choice if I had a choice.
So talking about mechanics, this is something that in Frontier Dawn, when we were reworking the rule system and wanted to release the game, we were talking about weapon styles with people. I'm like, how when you go to a game, we always talk about how it didn't make sense if I can use this this single-handed sword. I'm like a master with it, but give me a dagger. Well, what is this thing? Like this butter knife in my hand? Like all of a sudden you lose all sense of how to use this weapon. Like you can't even attack anyone with it. Like you're unable to hold it in your hand. We're just like, wow, that's really dumb. We didn't like that idea. So, and talking what Tyler mentioned is we implemented that anyone can use any weapon, but you can only gain proficiencies in X fighting style, which will carry multiple weapons. But anyone could pick up a sword and shield and start using it. Because anyone could pick up a piece of wood and put it on their arm and start moving it around. There's no reason why anyone can't do that. And it boggles my mind when I go to a game and they're like, "Oh man, you're a master of that single-handed sword," but as soon as you pick up that piece of wood and put it on your arm, you might as well just be a sloth in the ground. You can't defend yourself at all. I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense.
No, that I understand where you're coming from because there's a thing is you can fight with anything. You might not be skilled or proficient with it, but at least you're going to have the opportunity to mess around with it.
I found that people really enjoyed that part of it. People were just bringing shields on the main mods, and it allowed people to strategize more. During a mod, they'd be like, "Oh my god, impromptu shield wall! Everyone grab their extra shields they brought with them." And I'm like, "Wow, this is awesome!" They're using this, and I didn't even think about that strategy on the fly. And everyone can use a bow because everyone can pull back an arrow and use it. They might not be the best shot, but they can sling an arrow. I mean, we all remember from Lord of the Rings when they were giving kids these bows to use to fight the Uruk-hai. Anyone can pull back this bow and shoot an arrow into a horde. You might not hit them, or you might do that much damage, but everyone can still do it. And they're using these weapons and that they can't use to the best of their ability, but they still can use to create these amazing strategies to combat these opponents. And I really like giving the opportunity of people to be creative.
I definitely agree with you on there. Realistically, anyone can sort of pick up a weapon and use to its basic ability. And even a lot of fantasy settings, they use that sort of in things like you mentioned in Lord of the Rings and also in the book Ranger's Apprentice. There's a moment where a sort of Mongolian-esque army of horse archers are on their way, and all they have to fight with are slaves and a massive amount of bows and arrows. They obviously don't have the time to train the slaves how to use a British-style longbow. Instead, they sort of just create 3 firing positions and use markers. So the fact that anyone can really take a fighting style and break it down to a bare bones-esque sort of style in its own, it's easy to see that anyone can use any style of weapon. If I can use a dagger, I could realistically use a sword. If I can use a one-handed sword, I could realistically use a two-handed sword. I might not be able to use it to the best of my ability, but I can use it nonetheless.
Now, since we kind of went over what our preferred means of fighting are, what we like to fight with best, what about actually having specific strategies for various fighting styles? Maybe we talk about what's something you should focus on if you're going to fight with 2 daggers. What you should focus on if you're going to fight with 2 Florentine weapons. I mean, then again, it will be splitting hairs because it's okay, are you going to fight with 2 weapons of the same length? Are you going to fight with a sword and a dagger? Are you going to fight with a short sword and a long sword? So, it is kind of weird to talk about it like that, but in the general, what kind of strategies do you guys have for if you're going to fight with any kind of weapon?
So I would say that it's less about the weapon I'm fighting with, and it's more about the weapons that my opponent is using that factor into how I'm combating them, in my opinion. And for example, if I'm fighting somebody who is using a sword and shield, obviously my first targets are going to be their shoulder and their legs and movement. My movement is going to be paramount to them to make them move, from their shield side and to hit them on the counterattack. Those are going to be the openings I'm looking for. And if I'm fighting somebody who's using a Florentine style, I'm going to wait for them to overextend or overcommit, and then I'm going to hit them with something devastating and tough that's to react to. If I'm fighting somebody who's using a two-handed weapon, I'm going to close the distance, even if I'm using a two-handed weapon myself. Anything to slow them up so other people can help me. Something I can gang up on them. I really focus more on the fighting style of my opponent and what they like to do, and stopping what they like to do to put them in an uncomfortable position, as opposed to what I like to do. I feel like when I do that, if I just focus on my basics and stop them from doing their favorite thing, it really gets them out of their flow, and it makes the fight on my advantage.
Right. And those are very good general kind of strategies when facing those kind of weapons. Um, Tyler, do you have anything that kind of just concurs with Jake, or maybe something for when facing or using a different kind of fighting style?
I definitely think I agree with you in a sense. I definitely don't want my opponent to be making decisions of their own accord towards their inclined decisions and strategies. But I sort of split off at that, in which I typically, with a lot of my fighting styles, I make decisions that sort of it enables sort of an opening for my opponent to make a decision, which is what I want them to make. I sort of fight to this end of making my opponent make decisions that give me the advantage. Maybe if I'm fighting a sword and shield fighter, I'll start retreating and switch to sort of a ranged attack, even though I know it's not going to work or it would take me an hour. It's going to sort of force my opponent's hand into abandoning his preferred position and marching up to me, which could further my end. If I'm fighting a dual wielding opponent, I might retreat into a position of confined space so he can't swing as quickly and freely as he wants. He has to really focus, and it sort of takes away from some of his energy.
I think Tyler brings up a really good point with he's talking about his strategy and forcing your opponent to make a decision of one or two things and being prepared for those outcomes. And I also think when we're talking about LARP fighting styles, it also comes to the point of, am I fighting somebody who knows the weakness of their fighting style and then knows if they know how to counteract those or knows of them, it makes the fight very different. And I'll use the example of sword and shield because we've been talking about the most. So sword and shield is vulnerable because they're usually more stationary and usually have their legs or like knees and upper shoulder to be vulnerable, and they're vulnerable when they attack. Someone who knows this often is turtles up, so to say, or is very quick with their movement of their legs or their shoulder and can be very protective. So how do you counteract this? Well, you can either use the feats in game to counteract this. You can either get somebody else, so you have another ally for them to focus on. So now it's 2 versus 1, or you could try to use speed to outmaneuver the turtle. And beyond that, the only real thing you could do is you play mind games. It becomes the meta of the game. Maybe you drop your shoulder a little bit too much on a couple of your swings. The person thinks that's an opening. When they go for that and they are open, you hit them with something really strong. At that point, you're almost giving them tells or vulnerabilities in your armor because you need them to make a move so that you get an opening. And you're playing a risk-reward scenario, which a lot of fights, that's what they boil down to, is risk-reward. Can I make them make a mistake so that I can capitalize on it? And if I capitalize on it, will it be enough? Because once my ruse is over, I'm done. They have me. I've used my trump card. It becomes very intense in that way of the meta of the fight. Even though at the end of the day we're swinging these swords out in the jungle wearing these costumes, it can get really intense in that way when you're fighting two people who are very into the combat.
I mean, the joke's on you because I'm not left-handed.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I agree with you. I definitely like the mind games and the mental fuckery is definitely something fun to toy with, especially like there's been a few times at Chronicles of Rohan where I fight with my two-handed sword, but I'll just leave it on my shoulder with one arm and then just hold my hand out like this, just as a bait, and then just come right in for a strike. So there's definitely all kinds of weird, cool tactics that you can develop on your own and mind games and stuff to really lull them into think that there's this false weakness that they can capitalize on, and then suddenly they fall into your trap, and then you spring it, and they're like, oh shit. But then again, like you say, once you use the ruse, then what else do you have? So it might be a good idea to kind of have a couple of those in your back pocket. It's like I don't necessarily know. Like maybe like Tyler says, like maybe you fight with like your worst style in the beginning of the exchange, and then suddenly you abandon that, and then you go to your best style, which is your style that you're most proficient in, and you have like skills and abilities to back it up, and then suddenly like, oh man, I'm not ready for that. Now they're on the back foot. Now they got to figure out how to deal with you instead of you reacting to them, because it's definitely better to be the aggressor than have to be reactionary to what they're doing all the time.
As we've all brought up clearly in this discussion, surprise is quite a weapon in these fights. But what a lot of people discount is surprise at the beginning of the fight. If you're going up against an opponent and suddenly mid-fight something happens that you weren't expecting, all right, I'm already in the middle of the fight. I can't really change up my strategy. I just have to continue on and adapt as best I can.
Do you have an example?
An example would probably be you're fighting a sword and shield fighter, and then halfway through the fight they ditch their shield and draw a second sword. You were fighting a sword and shield fighter a second ago. They're stationary, and suddenly they're drawing out a sword. All right, it's surprising, but they still have a second thing in their arm. Yeah, they can now attack with the second thing, but I gotta just stick with my strategy. It's already too late in the fight. I can't just like entirely stop the fight, think for another 10 minutes, and then get back to it. Whereas if in the beginning of the fight you approach, I've got a sword and shield, we're talking for a second, and then the fight starts and you start to approach me to go to fight, and I immediately drop the sword and pull out a second weapon. Or I immediately drop the sword and just don't even do anything with my second arm. Well, what do? You just stop for a second in the beginning of the fight. That's some of the most critical moments. And now what do you have to do? You have to deduce what their true strategy is. You have to start making moves to figure out, okay, was that a bait? Was that a ploy? And you have to suddenly, at the beginning of the fight, change your whole strategy. You no longer have a strategy. Your new strategy is to figure out what their strategy is doing that.
I think Tyler brings up a good point. And listen, there's a reason why when we play D&D or Pathfinder, you want to be the first in the initiative board. You want to be the guy who makes the first move. Okay, you always want to be that person, because as soon as I make my first move, you're reacting to my first move. It's that's just the nature of the dance that you're beginning to do. And I also feel like the mental state of your opponent in that moment can play a big factor. For instance, if you're fighting a new LARPer and you're someone who's LARPing for a little bit, if you really want to beat the opponent, I recommend aggression. You can overwhelm them with just your speed, your moves, hit them at awkward angles. They don't know what's going on. They're only used to a couple attacks, and they very quickly will fall because they're just not used to the forward motion of your attacks. But if you're fighting somebody who is, you're very vulnerable. They'll quickly be like, okay, this is what this guy wants to do. You gotta, and that's when like feints come into play and things like that. As far as I'm not a really big fan of playing mind games, so to speak. With dropping my weapons and pulling up a different fighting style. I always begin the fight with my best fighting style because I want to have the best. I want to fight their person at their best. I want to fight them at my best. Obviously depending on the role. If I'm talking about being a PC here, something that I do like to do, and this is a habit I have, is when I start fighting somebody and we go back and forth for a little bit, and I kind of test the waters. If I want things to be, I'm like, all right, I see how this is going to go. I start with my footwork. I'll literally start like bouncing on my toes. I'll kind of go back and forth really quickly and side to side, moving in very awkward ways. That kind of like gets the opponent very much off their footing, in my opinion. You pick the pace up and you slow it down. You accelerate and decelerate the pace. And a lot of times that can really mess with somebody. They don't know how fast you're going to swing, how slow you're going to swing, where you're coming from, if you're running away, if you're pushing forward. Those very simple things that aren't really, you really don't got to think very hard about them, can change a fight very drastically. And it really doesn't matter what fighting style you're using. I've used this with Florentine, even Sword and Shield. It's supposed to be a stationary fighting style, but if you literally start going back and forth and it's moving very slightly forward and backwards, side to side, to your opponent, they're gonna, they're more tracking your movement now than they're tracking your weapon. Or they have to track your weapon and they're not tracking your movement. You quickly get a good angle or position on them that they weren't expecting.
Right. Good. Those are definitely all good points right there. I mean, then again, personal flavor and taste accounts for a lot when you decide you're going to get into a fight. So you don't like to play the mind game so much, but you definitely still have like your shtick that you like to pull. It's like I don't always use the mind games either. And you know what? I kind of built my character currently in a way that, I carry a side sword, but I don't want to have to ever use it. That's the fallback weapon. If I'm using that, then something's gone wrong. Let me see here.
Yeah.
Oh, so I mean, I think we kind of skirted this too, but it definitely falls within combat. Armor and how it applies in combat and stuff like that. So in the real world, and based on a lot of research I've been doing, we definitely get the wrong impression of how good armor is. And in the movies, you see guys that like get sliced across the gut while they're wearing like a chainmail hauberk, and with like a leather brigandine or something over it. You're just like, oh man, that armor isn't worth shit. That guy just hit him with that sword across the gut and he's dead. I was just watching Braveheart last night, and I'm watching these guys get cut down, and I'm like, man, the English guys, their armor is like garbage. I couldn't believe it. And then in all the research I'm doing, I'm like, man, like when you were wearing plate mail, you were all but invincible. They needed a special dagger to kill you through the eye hole. It pushed you over, knocked you from your horse, and then bam, right through the eye hole, and that's the best way to kill you. So I'm trying to figure out where's the middle ground when it comes to LARP combat to kind of get the feel like armor, is it just extra hit points? Is it actual protection? And then the levels of armor. It's such a weird middle ground. It's a weird point to try and find. Where is it going to be perfect and make everyone happy?
It's tough to say with armor because if you try to compare it to real life, obviously armor in real life, there are various types of armor from various different cultures of different technologies that each developed their armor to counter their fighting style, but then their fighting style adapted to counter their armor, and it went back and forth. In Europe here, plate mail, it went, we had chain mail, we had plate mail, brigandines, which are all extremely different to the armors found in other cultures, such as
like silk.
That found out on the steppes over in Mongolia, Manchuria, or different to the armor in Japan, different to what warriors of the Aztecs would wear. It all was affected by cultures and technologies, but when you bring it to a LARP, you can't. It's tough. It's almost impossible because then it comes back down to the safety issue of it's just not safe to wear that armor. It's just not safe to fight with this fighting style. It's not safe to fight against that armor.
Building off what Tyler is saying, I think that at this point, because we're talking about combat fighting styles, specifically in LARPing, that armor is almost another topic, in my opinion, or issue because of there's involved so much mechanics behind it. How is your armor taking place in your game? Because I've been to games where armor is very powerful, and if I fight somebody who's wearing armor and they're using like a sword and shield fight, and I'm not wearing armor, I'm like, I'm not even gonna. My whole point of this fight is no longer to beat them. It is to tire them down or for me to get away. Mechanics of armor can totally change how the LARP combat works. And I think a lot of times what I see is they add things or abilities to either they add abilities to bypass armor, such as magic that's going through armor, or giving abilities like that bypass it to do direct damage to you, but otherwise normal damage is like having this high durability you have to beat through, or extra defenses, or you have armor that's like not so strong. Maybe it's extra health, or maybe it's extra this. And it's like, yeah, you could wear that armor, but you're restricting your movement. You have to carry it around all the whole time. Is it as much of an advantage? Personally, in my opinion, you think about plate armor as the analogy that you used, Avi. When you talk about people who wore plate armor are almost invincible, how many people were wearing plate armor back then?
Oh no, I'm definitely. I'm trying to think because in a couple of different things I've researched, like it's like the equivalent of spending like a couple $1 million.
Exactly, and that's my point. Is you won't have it's if you have a game where we're going to make this as realistic as possible. Everyone's going to be like, okay, I want to show my plate armor because I only have to wear it for 1 8-hour period when we're fighting. I'm not wearing my armor for a whole campaign and to reclaim Jerusalem and or like defend my castle against this horde. Like you're not wearing that armor for like multiple weeks or days under the hot sun as they would wear it and die of heat exhaustion. You're wearing it for short periods where you can be this invincible knight, which is a really cool feeling, but it's really hard to balance a game around that. And that's when fighting styles and mechanics kind of have this bridging point of where do I sort of cheese one aspect of this to make the other one feel more realistic.
Well,
you know, the guy.
If you had to choose though, like, do you think it's more realistic that it's or more beneficial to the game when, as far as combat goes, when you're scoring off opponents wearing armor, that it's just extra health for you to bite through, or it actually gives them a real, more realistic level of protection to make the armor worth wearing? And there's the other caveat is that a lot of people in a lot of games now, they allow things like crafted armor that's not made of the correct material, such as plate represented with like EVA foam and stuff like that. So, and I don't mind that so much anymore. I used to kind of get on about it because I'm wearing while I'm wearing like a much more realistic full suit of plate armor with the correct amount of weight and such, and they're wearing even though if it's done beautifully, like a suit of EVA, and they're still getting the same amount of protection. I used to be like, oh, come on, dude. Like, I'm actually really restricting myself in my movements, and I'm locking up on the joints and all this other shit. I kind of got over that now because I'm like, one person, like you said, when you did an episode for 321 Leon where you're talking about the appreciation for people crafting their stuff. I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I've definitely changed my tune about that. But I'm just wondering how you feel. What's going to be the best thing,
So for me personally, the biggest factor is what the set is. Obviously, your setting. What is the setting of your world that you're in? If I'm living in next to a city or some place that has all these amenities that makes sense that my armor is always like well kept and maintained, then maybe I can see your armor being better than usual. I'm going to use Frontier Dawn as the example. So Frontier Dawn, you're living in a new continent. It's the jungle. It's the forest. If I'm wearing plate armor in the forest, I don't care if I bring the best smith with me. He's not going to have the abilities to maintain your material or your armor to be as peak physical condition if I'm in society.
Not to mention the expense of that.
Yes.
If you're looking at realistic things.
Well, then if you're gonna bring up the expense of something though,
fixing your armor, it brought up that you're only fighting in your armor for 8 hours. Okay, well, 8 hours worth of combat can do a lot of realistic damage in real life to armor. And then you're talking about going into a battle perhaps the next day, you haven't had time to repair your armor. Or even if you've made repairs to your armor, those repairs over the weak spots are inherently weak because of it.
And I would also say, in the same vein that, a smith in a game could create a faster sword in 5 minutes, your armor isn't as invincible as maybe it would be in real life. You kind of have to get a little bit of a give and take with every LARP, in a sense. You can't be like, oh, wow, my armor is invincible, because where do you go from there? How do I get better armor if my armor is already invincible? You kind of have to give yourself this building up point. Well, right now maybe your armor gives you more health, but maybe in the future your armor gives you more health and an extra defense. And then maybe even after that you get another defense and even more health. And then after that you get a unique ability. The problem, I don't want to give you this best awesome armor right from the get-go, because where do I go from that? What's the point of getting better gear? What's the point of exploring more to get better things? That's what I'm saying. The setting and kind of the pace of your game and the crafting you have involved plays a really big part in armor, because everyone's like, hey, not everyone, but a lot of people go to a game and like, hey, that's the town smith. And if you're like, he made me this plate armor, it's the best ever. Oh, okay, he's out of business now. Because all he did was he made plate armor for a couple people, and then now no one else needs anything from him.
So, but to answer the question though, do you kind of prefer it being more? Do you prefer it being like a threshold to beat, damage resistance, extra health?
Extra health. I'd always have extra health over damage resistance, because no one likes to hear, oh yeah, by the way, I know you've been swinging like 3 damage, but I've only been taking 1 damage for the last 20 minutes. That's like a horrible conversation to have with somebody when you're fighting them, and you're like, yeah, I'm getting the best of this guy. I really got him going. And he's just like, oh, by the way, my armor threshold is like 5, and you're swinging like 6s, or like you're swinging 4, so I'm only taking 1 damage. And you're like, oh, cool. Wow, this has been like an exciting fight for me. I just feel like that's like, I'd rather been like, oh man, this guy's got extra health. So kind of like, yeah, in the beginning of the fight, yeah, I'm fighting. I'm taking my licks, but it's okay. I got my armor. But then it's like, wow, I've been fighting for a little bit. Like my armor's dented and damaged. I feel like that's more than realistic when I'm fighting these heroes or monsters that are doing this like massive amounts of damage. My armor's wearing and tearing and wearing down. I prefer, to answer your question, blatantly, the extra damage or health as opposed to stacking defenses and giving yourself thresholds right off the bat. I feel like those are things that could be worked up to with maybe like legendary armor or epic armor,
Or
things
skills.
of a unique nature. But I feel like when you come in as a new player, and basic gear should be extra vigor and extra health. Nothing too extravagant like that. And I feel like that's the nature of LARPing. It's unrealistic, but it's kind of the way it has to be to a certain extent.
Okay. Interesting.
How do you feel,
Tyler?
Tyler?
It's obviously a very complex topic, but I feel like being a very mechanics-based topic, I feel like we're drifting away from the real combat-esque of it, and I think we could definitely have a whole conversation on armor itself and the mechanics behind it later on.
But you know what it was when I brought armor into the conversation, I was just trying to think like, we're talking about fighting styles and what's the best way to counter that, but I guess it is super dependent on mechanics.
Well, I definitely think if I see an opponent with armor, I'm backing off. I do not fight people with armor. I'll leave that to someone else.
Actually, that kind of never mind. That's way more mechanic based because I was about to bring up like, well, what if you're fighting a guy and he's in full plate, but you have like a warhammer? Is it more effective or?
What if you're fighting a guy who's 7 foot tall and you're only 4 foot tall? What should you do?
Retreat.
Get 2 more guys that are 4 foot tall, and now you're 12 foot tall when you stand on top of each other.
The answer is always retreat, people.
Yeah, that's
the enemy can't kill you if you run fast.
That's true. You win 100% of the fights you're not involved with.
Cowards. Fight to the bitter end. Damn the odds.
Bitter end is what you will have.
So I guess we're kind of reaching the end of this. I don't know if there's any other kind of like main combat points you want to give a thrust.
I guess what I want to say is don't be afraid to try another style, but also don't be afraid to find a style you like and stick with it. And if you aren't enjoying your fighting style, but you find combat to be too easy, change it up. Don't say to yourself, "Wow, I'm really good with Florentine. I'm like almost like I feel like I'm too good. Like I don't have fun fighting this way because I think it's so easy." Be like, "Well, man, maybe you should fight like two-handed weapon style and be like, this is so challenging. I love it." Or maybe be like, "Wow, I tried something else and I hate it. Now I love Florentine. Even now I re-love Florentine." Like find something and try to think different things out, but also stick with something enough to know if you like it or not. And NPC people, please go out there and NPC, play different characters, use different weapons. That's the fastest way. In one event, you could use every fighting style you have at LARPing and really have like an awesome moment or something and connect with it. And then go from there. You can almost form a PC just from your fighting style.
Good point. I try and change up my fighting style for every PC just so it doesn't get stale. Like I could be really good in one style, but I'm like I make a determined effort. Like, all right, my next PC, I was playing sword and board, two-handed weapon next time.
Tyler, I would have to say, definitely play every fighting style. You can never, obviously, going up against different fighting styles, it's tough if you don't know the weakness, and it's tough to learn the weakness if you don't use the fighting style. And just do prolonged periods where you use a specific fighting style. Play a character where you're doing sword and shield for a few events. Use two-handed for a few events. Try out Florentine a couple events. Try to get them down. Learn the basics of them, and at least try to learn the weakness and inherent flaws in them, and the advantages of them. Because then I guarantee you, regardless of what you use as your main fighting style, you'll at least have a step above whenever you come against someone using that, because you'll know how to fight. You know how they fight, so you know how to fight them.
Yeah, I also recommend that you go on a purely ketogenic diet, lift weights, run 10 miles a day. That's guaranteed to give you an edge in a fight.
I would definitely say don't skip leg day. You need to have those leg muscles to move. Don't be all upper chest. You got to have your legs.
No, you should be built like the Tasmanian devil.
Yeah, well, like Tyler said, if if you have good cardio and your legs are strong, then you'll win every fight because you just run away from the encounter.
He doesn't
I
fight.
just decided to
Runs
punch them
away.
with my actual fists.
Well, that's why you're not allowed in some LARPs anymore.
I know,
Remember,
right?
guys, choose life.
Yeah.
Run away at the start of the encounter.
Well, I choose free will because I'm a fan of Rush, but you can do what you want.
Oh, you know what? There's another thing I kind of wish I had brought up when I'm sure we've all faced this, but like, you know when you're in a fight and someone you can tell is obviously getting super aggressive, and they're not necessarily pulling blows, and you take the you're like, but you're being a good sport and stoic about it, like, um, you're not gonna retaliate and be that person who's like, all right, I'm not gonna give as good as I'm getting right now. Isn't that? Don't you find that such a task too? Like I don't know if it's frustration or or something's really bothering them, but they just start wailing on you with like super powerful hits. God, that gets me because I used to be like, all right, you're gonna hit me that hard. Well, prepare yourself.
For me, I always try to be the person that will say, because I really try to lead by example for my other NPCs, because I can't say, hey man, if they're hitting too hard, just kind of go with it. I'm not gonna tell someone to take abuse like that. If someone is hitting you too hard, you should say, hey man, pull your blows a little bit. And if they are more confrontational, be like, hey, what's wrong? Well, like what's really going on here, man? Like why are you really being like this right now? Like, are you just like super into the fight? Because like that's one thing. For me, if you're really into the fight and you're just like, hey, I'm sorry, I got too gung ho. I'm like, oh, it's cool, man. Don't worry about it. Like, I'll gloss it over, no big deal. But if you're like, oh, I'm like so pissed because this mechanic, I'll be like, maybe you should cool off. Because the problem is when you play that game, you're gonna have personalities that take it the wrong way, and you hit someone too hard, they hit you hard. It's escalation factor. People get upset, and being a big guy, someone hits me hard, I hit them hard. I will look like the bad guy when I hit someone too hard because like, hey Jake, you're 6'2", man, you really should hit them that hard. And I'm like, well, look how hard they were hitting me. And they're like, yeah, but Jake, you should know better, especially when you're part of running a game. You have to be careful about that kind of stuff. You should never escalate things.
Well, I mean, I don't have a problem every once in a while you catch a blow on the face. If anything, sometimes I'm like, oh man, if that was real life, I totally screwed up. I'd be dead. And I'll just be like, oh, hey, you know what, let's just keep going. But if you ruin my makeup, oh my god, prepare yourself.
Well, those are two very different things. You're talking about someone purposely hitting you hard and someone like accidentally hitting you in the face.
No, I'm just saying, like, when in combat, prepare for accidents because it does happen.
Yeah, definitely.
So you might catch a hard blow, and then you might be like, hey, that was kind of hard, and they'll be like, oh, sorry, I was in the moment. Or you might catch a blow in the eye or across your face, and you just I do my best to be a good sport and be like, oh, hey, no problem. If anything, I'm like, hey, good on you. That was a good shot you got in.
Something else, and I don't know if you experienced this, is someone who fights in an unsafe manner towards themselves. Like maybe they're really prone to like ducking a lot, like they duck a lot. And the problem is if I'm hitting you, if I swing for your chest and you're prone to ducking, now I'm hitting your head because you duck. It's like their pattern of fighting makes them more likely to get hurt. So it's almost like you have to either adjust your fighting or you have to be like, hey man, like you can't fight like that. Like stop, please stop what you're doing for your own good, man. I don't want to like brain you. I don't want you to lose your glasses and get them stepped on or like, scrape your cornea because you keep doing this awkward movement that's not really helping you. It's going to cause you to get hurt. Have you guys ever experienced something like that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Going up against, there was a particularly sort of wild fight going on, and this was it started out as a sort of scripted fight that was supposed to happen that really the NPCs took it upon themselves to really go wild, and the two NPCs ended up tackling each other and wrestling on the ground, and it sort of escalated the fight and made it unsafe for everyone around them because now you have people on the floor. You can't be fighting with people on the floor because then you're stepping on them, they're tripping you, suddenly you have a pile on the ground of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was certainly an unsafe moment. And afterwards, the staff made sure to correct it by sort of getting very strict on physical contact within combat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I would definitely say that combat, it's much like a dance, arm's length apart.
Yes,
arm's length apart, people.
Unless it's like a scripted kind of thing, and I agree with you. I think one of the big things I kind of that I saw that I'm like, this is probably very unsafe is that there was a woman at a game, and she was fighting with a two-handed sword, and she couldn't have been. She was probably pushing 5 foot, and her sword was just way, way, way too big for her. And given the benefit of the doubt, I was watching from the sidelines as she was fighting, and I could tell like with her swings, like it would spin her around, and she just didn't have good control of it. And I think a staff was approached about it, but nothing really came of it. And I think it's you definitely got to be aware of like the size of the weapons that you're using. Like if you're an example, if like you're a big dude and you're using a small weapon, you got to be careful because you're going to pack more strength in your blows just naturally. And if you're using a smaller weapon, you have a good chance of like striking someone with your fist.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree to that. It's funny. I don't know if I've had this very unique situation that you guys just remind me of, where I was actually fighting with somebody, and I was pretty new LARPing at the time, and they were hitting me pretty hard, and they hit me, and like I said, this was a smaller person, and they hit me. I'm like, hey, you're hitting kind of hard. Can you pull your blows? And they're like, oh, come on, you're a big guy, like don't be a pansy about it. And I'm like, really, man? Like, because you're telling me not to be a pansy. If I like hit you as hard as you're hitting me, like you're gonna get really hurt. Like I'm like I was like, I'm trying to be the mature adult here, and I was pretty young at the time. And it's funny because like sometimes you'll meet those people in the LARP community that are just not very mature when it comes to fighting. Well, they'll think they're like a 10th degree black belt who freaking won Mortal Kombat and defeated Shao Kahn, and now they fight LARPing. Yeah, exactly. And they're like master fighters. And I'm like, listen, dude, why don't you calm down and relax, and we'll both, I like having a good fight, but I'm not trying to brain you. At the end of the day, I got to go to work and, continue to provide for myself. Like, I'm not trying to get hurt when I go to LARPing.
All that matters, Jake, is I've delivered the illegal crane kick and won the karate tournament.
That is all that matters. Sweep the leg. I used to fuck guys like you in prison.
Whoa. All right, that's staying in. I just hope you know. All right, so I think we've hashed out a lot. This is a topic that we could break down even further and just go to be like, hey, let's have a whole episode devoted to fighting with two-handed weapons or bastard weapons or whatever. But I think we had some good content, good discussions, shared a couple war stories, which are always fun to talk about because that's what LARPing's about. And you make memories that you get to share and relive, and hopefully you inspire someone with how cool you make it sound, and they'll want to come and play a game with you.
Yeah, always up to meeting new people and LARPing with them. Come to Frontier Dawn, don't come to Frontier Dawn, just go out there and try LARPing. That's all I care about.
I was about to say, Jake, when is your next Frontier Dawn event, so we can kind of just get the word out there for our games having events?
My next Frontier Dawn event, I believe, is in August, and the actual event is posted on our website as well as our Facebook page. So go on the Facebook page or our website, and you can look at our lore, look at our rule book, and see if you like the game. And if you do like the game, check out the dates and see if you can make it. We'd love to have you guys there.
Chronicles of Roanon. I know their event is also in August, the weekend of the 17th through the 19th. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, in Barnegat, New Jersey. So please come out and support that game, as well as support Frontier Dawn if you're able to make it out that way. If you're a crazy person and you want to do both, I don't know if they're the same weekend, but by all means, God bless you, Godspeed. I used to be that guy that tried to get in 2 LARPs a month.
And then you took an arrow to the knee.
Yeah, then I took an arrow to the knee, and then I decided like I like money. So yeah, also please, we do have a Facebook page for our podcast group, and we would love to get suggestions or just comments and feedback because we're always trying to improve, whether it be video quality related, whether it just be topics and suggestions. We want to hear it all. On our YouTube page when we post this discussion, please put comments, give us a thumbs up. I definitely check the comments whenever we do get them, even if it's just a kind word saying like, hey, we enjoyed this or interesting stuff. That's cool, but mostly what I want to get in the feedback is suggestions for what we want to talk about. Right now in the works, we're doing a series. We're planning on doing a series about roleplay related, because I know as much as we like mechanics, Jake is on the rules and stuff for Frontier Dawn. Tyler enjoys reading the rules and stuff like that. We're all deeply involved in roleplay and lore for games. So we definitely want to do a series talking about RP, and RP involved when you're playing certain character archetypes, like interesting ways to play warriors, interesting ways to play mages, rangers, etc., etc., etc. So keep on the lookout for that. That's going to be coming from the Hall of Tales. Signing off from Hall of Tales. This has been Avi.
It's been Jacob.
And this has been Tyler.
Hope to see you again soon.